back. Joining us now is Congressman David Cicilline. He's a Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. And Congressman, you are going to introduce legislation next week, I believe, that will require the publication of the special counsel report. Why do you think that's necessary?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical that the American people who have been watching this investigation for the last 2 years are entitled to know the conclusions of the investigation, and they should see the report in its entirety, absent, of course, any stuff that has to be kept classified. Mr. Barr, when he testified during his confirmation hearings, was very evasive about making a commitment to disclose it to the American people. Legislation that I will introduce with other colleagues will require the production of that report. This is an investigation that was done on behalf of the American people. They have a right to know the results of it.
Now, that is a legislative path to have the American people and the full Congress see the report. There is a potential legal path as well. I want to read to you from an op-ed by Neil Katyal overnight. He noted the historical precedent here, which is Jaworski, who was the last special counsel in Watergate. He said, of course, there is no open impeachment inquiry now, but that could quickly change if Mr. Mueller writes a report that is anything less than a full clearing of the president. Congress would be under a constitutional obligation to investigate the facts for itself. The precedent here is that Jaworski turned over boxes of information with a bit of a roadmap, and Congress was allowed to see them after a judge ruled that it would be bad if they didn't have that evidence for their investigation. Do you think
that's right?
That
and there's another, yes, there's another course to the Judiciary Committee could compel Mr. Mueller to come before the committee and produce the report. So I think the chairman has made it clear that we intend to do everything possible to ensure that that report becomes available to members of Congress and the public. We have a responsibility to be sure the American people see what this report finds, and we're going to use both legal remedies, legislative remedies, court remedies if we need to, but this report belongs to the American people. They have a right to know the truth, and we're going to make sure they do.
My reading of the historical precedent is that the reason that the House Judiciary Committee was able to see the evidence collected by the special prosecutor was because a judge determined that there was already an open impeachment inquiry, formal impeachment proceedings. Are you willing to open formal impeachment proceedings if that's the only way to see this evidence?
Well, I didn't read the precedent that way. I think, in fact, there's still a basis for Congress to demand that report with ongoing investigations underway in the Intelligence Committee, oversight hearings in the Judiciary and oversight committees. So there are proceedings underway in terms of investigation of the administration that relate to this. And so I think there's clearly a basis to compel the production of the report. But I think we're committed to making sure we get access to that report. The American people have a right to see it and know the truth, and I think we're prepared to do whatever is necessary to do that.
There's classified information, and of course you're saying that should be redacted, but then there's also the grand jury testimony and grand jury information, and that's what could be protected here. You will not be able to see that unless a judge opens it up, right? I mean, typically speaking, historically speaking, grand jury testimony is private. That is where the information might be that you might want if you're going to pursue some kind of recourse here.
Absolutely. And I think if we determine that there are grand jury proceedings that are essential to see, as you suggest in your question, that we will pursue a legal strategy to get those. But hopefully this won't be necessary. Hopefully the Attorney General of the United States will understand the critical importance to the American people and will provide the full report and all the supporting evidence to the Judiciary Committee and to the American people.
But you are not at impeachment yet, even if just as a means for leverage here.
Oh, no, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I think it's critical that we get this because it may, in fact, have facts which support initiating impeachment proceedings, and we cannot be precluded from seeing it. So if we have to have some sort of perfunctory motion to open it up in order to access those materials, I think it's critical that we do it.
All right, I want to ask you about a case out of Maryland right now. A Coast Guard lieutenant is under arrest on weapons charges, but officials say he was planning multiple murders of Democratic politicians, also media personalities, someone who apparently had been a self-proclaimed white supremacist for 30-plus years, who had read up on various terror activities. The president hasn't weighed in on this yet. Do you think he needs to speak out?
Well, I think it would be certainly helpful if the president did. I mean, any time that a individual engages in that kind of behavior and makes those kinds of serious threats, they ought to be condemned by everyone. I think to the extent that people have maybe misread some of the president's statements and some of the language that he's used as an invitation to do something like that, it would be very helpful if he made it very clear that violence such as that is never permissible and would condemn it in the strongest terms. I think it would make a difference. Apparently,
in some of the writings of this suspect, he talked about what would happen if there were impeachment proceedings, if something did come of the Mueller report. Are you concerned about the political environment in general that exists in these coming weeks when parts of this report become public or when this does reach this conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of what has been particularly damaging about the president's ongoing effort to attack the institutions of this country, rule of law, the FBI, courts, the legitimacy of the Mueller investigation. I think it has, encouraged that kind of thinking, and we need to have a president who respects the rule of law, who honors the critical institutions of our democracy, who supports the brave men and women in law enforcement and our judicial officers, our free press. So I think the president's ongoing effort to undermine this investigation and to attack our democratic institutions has been harmful to our country, and I think, as many people have, asking him to stop and to instead use language that supports these critical institutions would be very helpful. But I think it's led to a deterioration of respect for things that have made America the envy of the world: a free press, an independent judiciary, highly qualified law enforcement, and rule of law. Those are the crown jewels of our democracy, and we need a president who understands that and supports that and speaks about it in a supportive way.
Congressman David Cicilline from Rhode Island, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Allison.